Today's episode of the StallSide podcast was brought to you by Rood and Riddle Veterinary Pharmacy.
How's it going?
It's a great day today. How are you, Peter?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, so we got one of our own on the show today.
One of our own, one of my favorites, Dr. Dale Brown. Coerced him to get into the room with us today during breeding season, which is amazing, and thrilled to have him in with us.
Yeah, you must have some real pull in this town if you get Dale in at this time of the year, because they say, he's a really hard man to get hold of.
Oh, yeah,
busy.
I know all his ghosts and skeletons.
Yeah. Well, actually, I heard a bit of a rumor that you may have been involved in the formation of this guy.
A little bit, yeah. No, he. I had to get out of his way. Honestly, I can't take any credit for it. He became a great veterinarian, and I just, I'm glad to have been along with him. It's been awesome to see him blossom and become who he is from, the new grad, but he's just a great guy.
So despite your best efforts, he turned out okay.
Yeah. No, I knew to stay out of his way. He'll be great.
That's great. So on StallSide this week, we have Dr. Dale Brown. Dale has a practice centered on reproduction and sales, but he also knows a lot about vaccines and how they're useful in herd health. Dr. Brown, welcome to StallSide.
Thanks for having me.
Dale Brown, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's a privilege, especially to be invited by you.
Take time out of your busy spring schedule to be with us is great.
Yeah, it's 75 degrees outside. No place I'd rather be than sitting in here with you.
I know, that's good.
Yeah. Hey, Dale, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, okay. This is actually year 19 being here. I was Dr. Barber's second intern behind Dr. Hyde.
He turned out remarkably well for that too.
Yeah, we did well.
Somebody else must have influenced you in the right
Dr.
direction.
Hyde. Dr. Hyde for his first intern.
There you go.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that long ago. I tell you, it's because I'm thinking about where I'll be in 19 years from now. It ain't good.
Don't worry, I'll push you around your wheelchair. It's all right.
Good.
Let's see. I came here in 2006 as Dr. Barber's second intern. Come from Kansas. Grew up on a cow-calf farm back in Kansas, and kind of got interested in equine reproduction when I was in high school and worked at a quarter horse breeding farm there in my hometown. Stood there on stallion and, did the whole AI thing, collected stallions and all that. Went to Kansas State for undergrad, and I'm not one of the traditional veterinarians that always want to be a vet. That's all I ever want to do. I took a indirect route to veterinarian, went home at Christmas my senior year of undergrad, and decided that I always thought I was going to do a master's PhD in equine reproduction, and figured out I was never going to be able to write a thesis or defend anything in my life. So I figured I better just use my clinical skills. And so I broke it to my advisor when I came back from Christmas break. I said, I want to go to vet school. And he kind of looked at me with three heads and says, well, that's not good because you don't have any of those prerequisites done. And I said, yeah, I'm aware. I was an animal science major, agribusiness minor. And so we set a schedule up for me to graduate on time in case I didn't get in on my first try. I'd have my bachelor's to rely on. And then he set me up with nothing but a full summer and another year of nothing but chemistry and physics.
Wow.
Wouldn't go that route if I was you.
And he was complaining about being in here, but look what he's been through.
Yeah, exactly. So survived that. Luckily got into Kansas State to vet school on my first try. And then once I was in vet school, I was always equine oriented. Knew I wanted to go equine full time when I got out. Came here in 2006 with Dr. Barber, and I have a kind of a heavy equine neonatal practice in the spring, and then switch hats and pretty much mimicked what Dr. Barber's practice was when he first came into practice, and switched to yearling public sales in the second half of the season, x-ray scopes and just some general medicine. I still do float teeth, which Bart thinks is ridiculous to do.
No. I think it's great that you do it.
Yeah. As long as it's not you doing it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's not my favorite thing, but it's great.
Yeah. Bart likes hard work. He could watch it all day.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, one thing he's not telling us, when he gets done in the afternoon.
Yeah, I do have a purebred Angus farm here with my wife and 3 kids. So I go from a paying job to a expensive hobby, and but that's my stress relief.
And kids love it. His wife
love it. Show and 4-H, and it's perfect way to raise kids. So.
Oh yeah, farm life's good. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I'm just thinking about it. Why would you want to be anywhere else?
Yeah. So,
That's awesome. They're great kids.
Yeah. So you've got a very interesting practice with all the stuff you do the repro, do the sales. But here today, you are very experienced in herd health things, and we just wanted to tap your wisdom on vaccination, and how you sort of see that as sort of being integral to sort of keeping horses healthy.
Yeah. So I kind of got into that side of things actually when I was with Dr. Barber back in 06, 07, which is getting quite a ways back. Leptospirosis was a big problem here in Central Kentucky. Lots of abortions and mares and stuff, and we back then there was no vaccine, and so we were following titers on all these big populations of mares and trying to catch them when they first got exposed and hopefully treat them before they led to abortions and stuff like that. Got a whole bunch of spreadsheets full of titers to follow and stuff, and it kind of sparked my interest in, now that we have Zoetis has a lepto vaccine on the market. I sat on that panel when they were first developing it, just because of my experience with all those titers clear back then, and that's kind of how I got into the whole herd health and vaccine side of things, and been on a couple different panels for pharmaceutical companies whenever they're not necessarily not necessarily vaccines, but antibiotics too, like when Exceed came on the market and stuff like that. So it's kind of how I got into that, and it's something that it's very important part of practice. Everybody kind of thinks, it's vaccines. It's just one of those things to do, but the biggest takeaway from all this probably is that there is no blanket protocol or standard protocol that fits all horses. Even here in Central Kentucky, there's, farm by farm has different disease problems that they get exposed to versus others. Density of population on the farm, just number of mares in and out. Some are more closed herds, some are constantly changing mares in and out all during breeding season type of a thing. So all those weigh in, and so it's very important to set that up with your veterinarian and have a that veterinary client patient relationship that you set your vaccine protocol around. Now, in general, we can talk about, now also just to the general public, the AAP website has a great resource on vaccines on there that anybody can get to, and kind of does a good job of explaining what vaccines are really important and which ones are more risk-based type thing like that too. So that's AAP.org.
Okay. Now and it is a great resource because it's really hard to sort through all of the information we have, all the marketing materials that all the drug companies throw at us to promote their specific products and why it's different than somebody else's. And it's really hard for even veterinarians to sort through. So if you're the end user and not as familiar with that stuff, the AAP is a great resource for that.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's interesting. When I was my interview to get into vet school, this was one of the questions they asked me. If you could only vaccinate for one thing, what would it be? And that's a easy softball lob. And the obvious answer is tetanus, but it depends. And it depends on where you're at, what you're using your horse for. So that's not as really as straightforward of a question as you might think, because depending on what you're using your horse for and what their purpose is, that might have a different answer.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the AEP came out with this a few years back of the core vaccines, those 5 core vaccines that, so you got Eastern equine encephalitis, Western equine encephalitis, tetanus, rabies, and West Nile. Okay. Those 5 that they recommend that every horse, even in general population, that core vaccine is what they should receive. For just over the years, it's been very proven that those vaccines are very efficacious against disease, zoonotic potential with rabies, and more mortality of those particular diseases.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The consequence of infection with all of those is
it's catastrophic. Yeah, it absolutely is. And botulism is one round here, which there's a lot of debate over. Now, to me, it seems like a no-brainer to vaccinate your horse for botulism in this environment, but that's something that we are constantly asked for. Well, do I need to vaccinate my horse for botulism? So what's your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. In Central Kentucky, it seems to be more of a regional thing. And I know growing up in Kansas, we never vaccinated for botulism in that area. We just didn't have those problems. But here, and so it's very important with so many influx, especially in the show horse discipline that ship in here and here for a few months, but potentially could be exposed to that, it's pretty important to get them vaccinated.
Yeah,
for
especially
botulism.
the foals around
And the
here
foals around here as
are
well.
a major problem. Yeah, because every year we'll get somewhere. You hit the nail on the head. A mare will come from out of state, and she'll come so late that there's no way to actually vaccinate her in late gestation to get her to produce colossal antibodies to protect that foal. So we get the foals coming that have got botulism, but also round bale feeding. Again, we used to get horses from like southern Ohio, and they weren't vaccinating there, and the horses are fed the round bale, and away it goes, and that's a major issue. I mean, West Nile, you touched on that, and the thing with West Nile is every year we get a few deaths from West Nile, but when the records are looked at, these horses have an unknown or incomplete vaccination history. When I first started in Pennsylvania, when I was at New Bolton Center, it was like sort of September, October of 2001. There were dead crows all over the road because the virus had just come in. It was killing the crows, and then it was knocking the horses over. And that was just when that vaccine was provisionally licensed. It had just hit the market, and we're flat out vaccinating these horses before they were falling over. I mean, that to me was a triumph for how quickly you can get an effective vaccine on the market and when you actually do your research and with the force of will, but also how devastating a new disease can be when it comes in quickly without too much warning. And we have all of these things that are preventable, as you say, with the 5 core vaccines. We have all these things that are preventable, but in some situations, people aren't doing those.
Right. And so you get those 5, and then we kind of categorize all those other vaccines that are out there as risk-based. So we just demonstrated those 5, catastrophic if you don't use them. The risk of not using them far outweighs any potential risks of actually giving a vaccine. You can't, just like in humans, you can't just assume that there's always a potential for some sort of anaphylactic reaction to any vaccine, to any antibiotic, any of those things. So it doesn't, there's not a zero risk, but the risk for those 5 core vaccines versus the risk of not giving them is overwhelmingly lopsided there.
It approaches zero.
Yeah. And so then you got this other subset, you got your flus, your influenza, your herpes virus, botulism. There's leptospirosis is now got a vaccine out there. Rotavirus that we use on mares that are been pregnant those last 3 months of gestation that we give. Bunch of those, and that's where it starts to come in that you really need that relationship with your veterinarian to decide which of those vaccines you need, and how often. Actually, on top of that too, there'll be closed herd backyard horses. They probably don't need a herpes virus vaccine every 60 days like we give to our broodmares here in Central Kentucky. Especially if they're not going to shows and that kind of thing. As a closed herd, just for around the farm. Yeah, you can get by with your core vaccine and probably a flu and rhino shot a couple times a year, and they're covered. Whereas you get these broodmare farms where you get a lot of in and out mares going to breeding sheds, exposing stallions. Much more important to make a protocol that is a little more intense and aggressive for those type of animals. And then in the show discipline, obviously traveling to shows, you're coming in contact with a lot of horses from a lot of different areas. So
you mentioned one vaccine. Have mentioned one vaccine is actually pretty controversial, and that's strangles, right? So that's a major disease issue, and so there's pros and cons for vaccination on strangles. What's your opinion on that?
That is probably one of the most risk-based vaccines in my eyes. It carries quite a bit more risk. So there's a killed product on the market, and there's a modified live product on the market. And the biggest problem is if you use that modified live, if you're going through a barn and vaccinating the herd with more vaccines, and you happen to mix up that modified live and happen to get it on your hands, and you drag that in with a needle, I've seen some pretty good abscesses on necks from horses. So you can use the killed vaccine, which you don't tend to have those problems. Don't feel like we necessarily probably get as much antibody response to that killed vaccine as we would in modified live, the intranasal. It's one of those that is controversial. I think there's some boarding stables that require it, and so some owners don't have a choice whether to, use it or not. For myself, I don't have any of my clients that use it. I prefer that we do some more biosecurity and just some testing of horses, new horses onto farms, that way versus the risk of having some sort of a vaccine reaction. But
you mentioned reaction because that's one vaccine particularly that, depending on the history of the horse, that could be an issue. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so you got this new horse to you have no idea, and its past has been up. They have potentially had strangles in the past, and you hit them with a new strangles vaccine, it potentially cause a puerperal hemorrhagica type of response. And you're not going to know that until you've given the vaccine and it happens. And then those can be, quite devastating as well. I've seen some ugly cases of those. So, probably not realistic that every new horse on the farm, if you're going to use the strangles vaccine, is going to pull a titer ahead of time. But for that risk, it's probably worth doing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's absolutely a fair comment. But other reactions, one resistance we see to horses being vaccinated, sometimes like in individual owners, is my horse had a reaction, my horse ran a fever, my horse became inappetent, my horse maybe got a little bit of a lump where the vaccine was. And to Bart's point, that's exceedingly rare, right? If it's happening to you, it's not rare. But when it does happen, these things don't happen very often. What's your approach to a horse that has actually had a problem with a vaccination? And if it's one of these core vaccinations that they're going to need in the future, which if you don't get are particularly devastating, how do you manage that client situation? How do you manage the horse to try to decrease the chances that there's going to be issues going forward?
Probably the first thing I do is would ask them if they know which vaccine actually caused the reaction to begin with. Like, was it a multivalent? Did it had several different different diseases you're vaccinated in? One is a multivalent, or was it just a botulism by itself? Was it just a flu rhino given by itself, or something like that to cause that reaction? If you know what that is, then you step back and say, okay, what's the likelihood? What's the risk to this horse that it's going to potentially get exposed to this disease? How important is it that we use it? If it, like tetanus, now that being said, I would think it's quite rare for a horse to have a reaction to just a tetanus toxoid shot. I personally have never seen one. I'm sure there's somewhere out there somebody has, but I would think those core vaccines, they've been tried and true for a long time, and just, I don't think there's a lot of reaction to those. I do think it's some of these others, and I think sometimes it's the more different diseases you're vaccinating against, and one of those multivalent vaccines, sometimes those are a little more reactive than the others. So first, try to figure out if you know which one, and secondly, sometimes it's just a matter of giving them Banamine before you give them the shot, or a little bit of Dex. Obviously, you're not wanting to dampen the immune response, because the whole purpose of giving them the vaccine, so they build immune response, have an immune response. But most of the time, you can manage it around it.
Yeah. What about the site of vaccination? Because for some clients, they say, "Oh, my horse got the vaccine in the neck and it got a sore neck." But are there other sites that you would vaccinate horses that had an issue?
Yeah, you can switch and try to use the gluteal muscles. You want a good patient to do that.
Yeah.
I take a sore neck versus a sore head from a hoof. There's other. I've heard people. I usually go to the gluteal region if I was going to go to. I've heard people doing it in the pectoral region as well. But yeah, there are other sites you could use. But yeah.
No, and back to the reactions, we did have a mare, now that I think about it, that had a significant reaction to one of the vaccines, and the owners had put a tag on her halter. And I've seen tags that say penicillin allergic too.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit like the necklaces that people wear that talk about their allergies, and for horses that are going to be traveling between farms and out of somebody's care who doesn't actually know that, it's good to put something permanent on there.
But let's face it, these do occur, but as a fraction of the number of vaccines that are given, it's infinitesimally small, and you're talking about the balance of risk. As say tetanus, you've seen some tetanus in your career?
No.
Yeah, have you ever seen a tetanus case?
Nope.
Well, I must have been brought up wrong, because I've seen some, and we get some through. I've had some through the hospital as well, but I've seen tetanus cases. You never want to see one of those again. Yeah. Because the first tetanus case I ever saw was it was in my first job. A client called me out, said, "Hey, my daughter's horse is colicking, and she's coming home from college on Saturday, and this was like Tuesday afternoon. So I drive out there all ready to treat a tetanus. This thing was just bent like a banana, sweating, and just rigid. And I had to say, Neville, your horse has tetanus, and there's nothing we can do. So, yeah, those core vaccines, I mean, whatever you have to do to get those horses those core vaccines, you've just got to do it, because if you see a tetanus, it's all over. Yeah, I mean, it really is. And again, for the number of reactions you see with vaccines, it's infinitesimally small. I mean, you know, we will, and we've all vaccinated horses where they've had a little bit of a lump, but really, with the balance of risk, what's worse, a little lump on the side of the horse's neck or West Nile? I know which I'd rather have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the good thing is encourage owners to let you know if they do have a reaction site, because we report those to the drug companies, and the drug companies want to know those type of things, because it's important for their statistics in case it actually start to see a trend or something. They can go back and look at batch and serial numbers to see if there's some sort of association.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing that's important to note, just because a horse got sore from a vaccine one time, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen again. There's lots of factors that go into what happens when you vaccinate.
Yeah, a little bit of a sore neck versus a full-blown hives everywhere, nose swollen, and or an abscess, something like that. You know, I get a sore arm when you get a vaccine. Back when you got vaccines as a kid, you're sore for a day.
Yep, that happens. So if you're picking your vaccination site on the horse, right, what do you look for in that site to sort of say, this is the spot that I want to go to?
As far as the neck?
As far as the neck, yeah, just, you know, say, what are the things you say, this is where I want to go to on the neck? Because, I mean, people, you just can't put it anywhere, right? No.
There's kind of that magical triangle just in front of the shoulder blade, kind of the angle of the shoulder blade, then the nuchal ligament of the neck running right across underneath their mane, and then their spinal cord. So, you know, about a hand's width in front of that shoulder blade and about a hand's width down from the nuchal ligament. Just kind of that magical triangle right there.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a subject debate as well, like clean, dry skin versus alcohol swabbing the skin down first. What's your opinion?
What I do, my opinion?
Yeah.
Make sure the dirt's off. It's semi-clean, but I do not wipe down with alcohol.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's something in debate, that people are trying to say they have less reactions and put alcohol on, but I wouldn't necessarily buy into that.
And one thing I would say, if people make a mistake, they get too low. I don't think people realize how low the vertebral column is in a horse. And you got to be above that. Yeah,
you've got to be very, very careful. Yeah, you just definitely don't want to be doing that. And how's about handling the vaccines themselves? I mean, what's good stewardship of the vaccine? You
know, those modified lives, you know, they need to get used once you mix them up. They really need to be used in that first 24 hours. And then, you know, the killed should be refrigerated until you use them. You don't want them sitting out on your dash in UV sunlight, getting real hot in the summertime. You know, in the wintertime, the other side of things is you don't want to go lay out a ledge, go down the shed row and light all the vaccines on the ledge when it's -10, and you go along and they're all frozen. That's detrimental to the vaccine as well. So you just handle them, you know, keep them cold until you're ready to use them. And then, you know, if you're going from barn to barn, most of us either carry a cooler in our truck, or those people that drive trucks with the refrigerators in them, just throw them in the fridge between. And biggest thing is you don't want to leave them.
That's a good idea. I should use mine.
Yeah, I know. I didn't learn that. I definitely didn't learn that from you.
We had great snacks in the fridge.
Yeah, you're gonna say
biggest thing is that UV sunlight, direct sunlight on them, and really heating them up is be careful with that.
Yeah.
Any new vaccines coming down the pike that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, and I you know, it takes years to actually get them through research and development. They're very expensive. I mean, it was part of the lepto thing, really. I think you wrote a letter to them with the importance of what the devastation of all these lepto abortions.
Yeah, the economic impact that had was
but
incredible.
You know how long it took them to actually finally listen. And no offense to the drug company, obviously. It's still a little bit of a regional thing to us. We think it's very important because of where we're at and the sheer number of horses we have that are affected by it here. But they have to look at it on a more national and global scale. They got to recoup their money from all this research and development and testing that it has to go through.
No, and I did appreciate that. That was I don't know if they make any money on that vaccine or if it's a donation to the horse industry. But
credit to them, it's a very
It's
Made
incredibly
a
helpful.
huge difference when I first got here. The lepto abortions and what you had to do to take the titers on those mares and treat those mares. So much drug was being used to knock the titers down on those mares to save those foals. I mean, it's just like stamp that out. I mean, it's been a remarkably successful vaccine.
And then obviously probably one of the hotter topics right now too is the rotavirus B.
Yep.
The rotavirus vaccine that's on the market is actually a conditionally licensed vaccine that we've used for years in late gestation in these pregnant mares. And, Gluck's, they're working on trying to get a rotavirus B, going through a study right now. Several farms and mares are enrolled in that. And, of course, way too early to tell. It's a blinded study and, we'll find out after the season. Collect all the data. We're collecting blood samples and colostrum and all kinds of stuff for them right now. Obviously, we hope it works because that would be huge for this area.
It will be huge. And, I mean, that's a really good example of sort of like farms, the industry stakeholders and everybody, veterinarians getting together and working together with money that's been sourced from the industry to actually solve a problem. I mean, this has been a really good thing to see people working together like this, because around here, rotavirus B is a huge problem, and it may not necessarily be problems in other places, but you talked about economic impact.
Right.
That is huge.
Yep.
And so it's just a shining example of how when people work together, good things can happen.
Yep.
Yeah, and we thank everybody involved in that. It's all the way from people collecting the data, all the way to the researchers at Gluck and to
the farms.
And the
several
farms,
farms that put up a lot of money to the research.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and they just just going for the greater good, and that's really sort of a model for how the horse industry works. Everybody's in it for the horse.
Yep.
Great. Well, that's been a fascinating tour along about vaccines and the career of Dale Brown, who's done remarkably well considered the start that he had. Yeah. I mean, I really just am quite surprised to hear that you turned out so well with where you started. But I
learned how important was it to answer your phone, because you could count on him not answering, so people just called you. So better answer.
So you became Bart Barber's answering service.
That's right.
Is that how you answered your telephone when they called up?
That's not true.
Yeah, I know, but it's a good story though. Yeah. So that was StallSide for this week. We've been talking to Dr. Dale Brown from Rood and Riddle Equine Hospital, ambulatory practitioner, general practice with an interest in reproduction, sales, and also quite a lot of knowledge when it comes to vaccines. See you next time.
Thank you.